Thanks for joining us for Baptist Press this week. In this episode, we're going to talk with Shane Pruitt from the North American Mission Board. Shane has spent the summer at camps all across the country. We're going to talk about how churches and individuals, families can interact with Gen Z, maybe finding ways to open the doors for gospel conversations. The conversation with Shane Pruitt is coming up. You don't want to miss it. Shane, thanks so much for spending a few minutes with us on Baptist Press this week. We are so thankful for the work that you're doing there with the North American Mission Board and the impact that you're making on students.
It's an honor. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, sure thing. Talk to us a little bit. One of the things, we've run a lot of stories. We've heard quite a bit about this, especially on this side of the pandemic, about the mental health struggles that students are having. What are you seeing? Do you believe that that's happening? Is that real? And if it is, then what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say with Gen Z, there's three areas that are really impacting that generation that the church really needs to lean in on, because
Mm,
if culture is screaming about these things and the church remains silent, then a whole generation only hears one worldview. And that's the areas of mental and emotional health, the areas of sexuality, and then the areas of the gender talk. And so I always say, the pandemic, shelter in place 2020, I don't think created new problems with Gen Z. It just poured gasoline on problems that were already there, because
mm,
you already saw a rise in depression rates, anxiety rates with Gen Z, even over what millennials were experiencing. And now going through the pandemic, and if we are able to say coming out the other side yet, if we're able to say that yet, you see the percentages really have gone off the radar. And so you have a whole generation that I think realized through a pandemic that the world is broken. They realize
mm.
something's wrong with them, and they are looking for hope. They're looking for answers. And that's a perfect opportunity for the church to come in and go, hey, we know you're looking for hope. We know you're looking for answers. We know you're looking for truth. And hope has a name. The answer has a name. Truth has a name, and that name's Jesus. Yeah.
Okay, so we want to talk about that. We want to get there, but let's take a few steps on our
Yeah.
way there. Let's
Sure.
talk about social media. Maybe talk a little bit about the impact that social media is having on teens and Gen Z, and then ways that churches and even individuals who want to reach out to students. But what are ways that they can leverage social media?
Yeah, absolutely. When you think of social media, there's been even some research done that often the time spent on screens directly affects the levels of anxiety. I mean, think about even what a teenager is exposed to on a daily basis. They're exposed to everything taking place around the world, the good, bad, and ugly. They're also exposed, if they're left out of something, they realize it in real time. You think about when we were teenagers,
Mm,
if we weren't invited to a party, we may never find out about it, or we didn't find out until days or weeks later. They realize it in the moment if they were left out of something. And so social media has caused a lot of, really, it's a weird dynamic where they're super connected and super lonely at the same time.
mm,
Almost screens have become like a security blanket for a lot of teenagers. I know even in we have six kids. Our oldest is 16. And it's so funny to watch her. Like if she's on FaceTime or on social media, she can interact with her friends a lot more comfortably than she can even in person.
mhm,
So screens have almost become like a safety net for
mhm.
a whole generation. And then I think it can be a light for the gospel, because we know you can ultimately share the gospel with one click of a button, one post around the world. And so it can be used for good, but I think the enemy obviously can use it for evil as well.
So talk about that balance, because hearing what you said about your 16-year-old, I've got five kids that range from 12 years old to 20 years old, and so they're right in that window as well. Um, I guess kind of our gut inclination is to take them away from screens.
Sure.
But going back to what you're talking about, with it being a safety blanket, it's a way to process in a safe way. That may not be the best thing every time to just take the screens away. It may be that we need to find a way to work in and through the screens to communicate with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that applies for all ages. Sometimes it's funny to watch parents talk about how often their kids are on their cell phones, and but you'll
Hmm.
see those same parents at a restaurant sitting across from each other on their cell
Hmm.
phones.
Hmm.
And so I think we can all be guilty of it. We can all make idols out of everything. I even sometimes when speaking to teenagers, I say, "Hey, what if you read one Bible verse for every social media post you read every day? How fast would you get through the Bible?" And they're
Hmm.
always like, "Oh," because they know it. I
Right.
think it's a part of discipleship to go, hey, let's leverage this for the kingdom of God, that there is a way for you truly to be an online missionary. Another way we talk about mobilizing students to live on mission is we always say, hey, that ground between your 2 feet at any point of the day, that's your mission field. That's where you're called to live on mission. Well,
Mm.
they have digital footprint too. So you could almost say, hey, that digital ground between your digital footprint, that's an opportunity for you to be an online missionary. That's not a place for you to post pictures of yourself, in swimsuits, or that's not a place for you to post about this or this negative thing or that negative thing, but it is an opportunity for you to be salt light online, because we know half the world's population is on social media. And so
Mm.
I tell a lot of churches and ministries, I go, it may sound superficial, but to Gen Z, if you're not on social media, it's almost like you don't exist as at all. So
Mm.
even churches and ministries got to have a presence on social media if you're truly wanting to reach where the next generation is. Yeah.
And so, how does a church start that conversation to specifically reach out to Gen Z on social media?
Yeah, I would always say, like, if you have young people in your ministry that are spiritually mature and they're active online, I would say get them on your team, because the experts on reaching Gen Z are Gen Z themselves. So I always say the most effective person at reaching a teenager with the gospel is another teenager that has a heart that beats with passion for Jesus, and that same heart is broken over the spiritual lostness of their own generation. So Gen Z, they know how to navigate social media. They know how to reach their generation. So I would say get them to the table, learn from them, hear from them, and add them a part of your decision making, your process of even your online strategies. So I would say include them. If you think about back to even shelter in place when everyone went online, here was a ironic thing that a lot of ministries saw, especially next gen ministries, almost the first ones to get screen fatigue and almost start rejecting a lot of online ministries were Gen Z, because it wasn't something new to them, right? For the
Hmm.
for the boomers and the Xers, they were like, "Oh man, watching church online, that's cool and new. Doing online ministry, that's cool and new." But they're digital natives. They've been doing that their whole life. So it wasn't really new for them. So he started even having to think outside the box of how to mobilize a digital native generation to do digital ministry, because they were almost some of the first ones to get fatigued from that.
Okay. Okay. So,
Yeah.
so sometimes because of that the digital platform, the engagement with digital content, things like that, I think that adults can be a little intimidated about engaging with teenagers, especially. Um, Talk a little bit about that. About how can adults in a church setting, even in family members, if you have nieces or nephews, or sometimes even your own children, you can find it difficult to engage, not digitally but face to face, or just trying to build a friendship or relationship with a younger person.
Yeah, absolutely. And often when I'm doing breakouts or speaking at conference, especially on reaching and engaging Gen Z, one of the major points I make on it is that Gen Z really aren't ageist, meaning they really don't care how old you are. And I always say this: they're not looking for cool leaders; they're
Mm.
just looking for real and authentic leaders. And so I say, if you are that jeans and sneaker person, then just be you. But if that's not you, then that's okay. In fact, one thing I think Gen Z really isn't tolerant of is when people try to become something or act in a certain way to identify with them. We were even joking a little bit before we hit record about some of the words that Gen Z use, like, drip and it's a vibe. Yeah, bet. Yeah. And so often if we're
Bet.
trying to use
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
just to engage
Yeah.
with them, I'll be honest, I think it comes off corny to them and comes off cheesy to them. And so I just want to encourage you, be
Yeah.
you. Um,
Yeah.
and just be real, be authentic, be honest about your own struggles, your own fears, your own doubts, be honest about your need of the gospel in your life. because I think that's super appealing to them. I think one thing Gen Z is aware of because of social media is they realize there's a lot of fake things out there. There's a lot of agendas out there. And I think it's a real opportunity for us to just be who we are, be who God's created us to be, and to say, hey, let me tell you about what God's done in my life. And I'm not going to try to be somebody I'm not. I'm going to be me, but let me tell you about what God's done in my life. And that was true for me. I didn't grow up in church. I became a Christian at 21. And the guy who reached me with the gospel was in his late 60s. And we couldn't have been more different. You know, I am a jeans and I am a sneakerhead. He wore Dockers every day of his life. You know, I used to joke with Brother Carr, I think, mowed his yard in his Dockers. You know, we couldn't have been more different. He was King James only, and I couldn't understand that at all. You know, we couldn't have been more different, but our common ground was the gospel, his love for me, and his love for me was authentic and real, and that was our common ground. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what I hear you saying, you just said it very well right there, is that authentic relationship,
Mhm.
whether it's at the beginning or as it matures and grows into a deeper relationship, that really becomes the door for gospel conversation, for disciple making, and for spiritual health and growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to encourage us with too, you know, as we get older, is that we have Generation Z and then the Alpha generation coming up behind them. And because of social media and the internet, they've been exposed to a lot of very dark things at early age. And
Mm,
so many of them are becoming very addicted to a lot of dark things at an early age. And so I always say one of the
mm,
core values we need to have in reaching the next generation is the ability to control our face, because young people, once they trust you and you gain their trust, they will be brutally raw and honest. They'll tell you all of their sin. They'll tell you all of their junk, almost to
mm,
the point sometimes you're like, hey, save that for the Lord. You don't have to tell me
mm.
everything. So we need to have the ability to even control our face, because if our mouth hits the ground or we look disgusted, then immediately I think those walls of shame will go up and guilt will go up. And so even having the ability to control your face when you hear what they're going to tell you, when you gain their trust. Yeah.
Well, that's helpful, Shane. When we come back, we want to talk to you about how churches can emerge from the pandemic and make an impact on students. Stay with us for more of Baptist Press this week. Thanks for joining us for Baptist Press this week. Our guest is Shane Pruitt from the North American Mission Board. Shane, we hope to some degree that we are on the other side, whatever that means, of this pandemic. What are some things churches ought to be considering as they're thinking about programs, about structure, about the ways that they reemerge after the pandemic?
Yeah, I love this question. I think especially when we were going through the pandemic and now coming out the other side is we want to think outside the box. We want to be innovative. We want to try new things. And I'm all for that. Especially in next gen space, I'm all for innovation and thinking outside the box and trying new things. But I think especially in reaching young adults, college students, teenagers, and so forth, if we're not careful, sometimes we'll overthink it so much that we forget the basics. And I just want to encourage you with this: the same gospel that has worked for 2,000 years still works today. The Bible is always relevant. And I think you have a whole generation coming up also. On some level, they're counting the cost of what it means to follow Jesus even before they follow Jesus, especially if they're in a public school or public university. They hear a lot of agenda talk. They see a lot of things. They hear a lot of negative things about Christianity. So when they go in on some level, they're going all in. That kind of squishy middle is going away with Gen Z. And so, they're over the fluff and puff. They're looking for spirit and truth. So stick to the word. Don't shy away from doctrine and theology. Listen, if they can handle algebra, they can handle some doctrine and theology. All right. So I just want to say, hey, preach the gospel, because I really do believe this. Like I said before, they're looking for hope. They're looking for answers. And we know hope has a name. The answer has a name. That name's Jesus. And I really here to tell you, in the last probably 2 years of ministry, I've seen more college students, young adults, teenagers get flat out saved in the last 2 years of ministry than probably the 15 years of ministry before that combined. And it's because they are searching for truth, and we can point them to Jesus, and then preach the word, stick to the word. The word's always relevant. Even people will say, hey, Shane, with some of those things, what's the best book out there on helping students navigate all this sexuality talk or gender talk? Like the Bible. The Bible is a really good book to stick with.
That's a good word. Hey, we sure appreciate you taking time with us here on Baptist Press. And like I said at the beginning, we certainly appreciate your ministry there through the North American Mission Board.
Hey, thank you. It's such an honor. Love what I get to do and run this race with everyone. And thank you so much for your heart to reach the next generation. We're here to serve you.
Thanks for joining us for Baptist Press this week. There are several other episodes of Baptist Press this week. If you're new to the program, make sure to find them at baptistpress.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for our email. We send 2 every day. We send 1 in the afternoon and 1 in the morning. We'd love to send it to your inbox. So sign up soon at baptistpress.com.